Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
Training camp starting up here in a matter of days for the Green and Gold Pack. The quarterbacks and injured players and rookies, I believe it is, reports on Friday, and then next Wednesday. Next Wednesday is the first practice. Already the first practice. Jeez. I know we're talking about practice, but whenever time we get to like training camp and I'm like, oh, fall's going to be in the air before you know it. It's going to be here before you know it. So we've been doing a little bit of a kind of storyline countdown series with Packers training camp and some of the storylines that I think are maybe the biggest ones heading into preseason and training camp and such. And, you know, we've talked about the offensive line. We've talked about defensive line, corners, wide receivers, and such. I want to highlight two of them today just to play a little bit of a catch-up game here. But I want to talk about the tight ends, and then I want to talk about play callers, talking Rich Bisaccia, Jeff Hafley, and Matt LaFleur. Let's begin with the tight ends. And when we talk about the tight ends, we begin with number 85, and that's Tucker Kraft. And Tucker Kraft is entering year 3 with, I think, some high expectations. High expectations for himself, high expectations from the team, high expectations from the fan base. There's a lot of talk from the Packers themselves about getting Tucker Kraft more involved in the offense. There is a narrative from the fan base that wants to see Tucker Kraft more involved in the offense. You go back to the conclusion of last year after the postseason game, it was Tucker Kraft that was pretty vocal after the loss and talked about stepping up his leadership and just overall the team-wise taking a step this year. Throwing phrases out there like saying, we need to wake up. And this was a guy that just got done with his second year. So I think when we look at Tucker Kraft this year, there's a few different things we could pay attention to with him entering this season. One, are we going to see him take a step in leadership? Now, we may not see everything involved in that leadership. A lot of us as fans, we just see what's on TV, or we read what the media has to say, some quotes, or hear him talking that. We're not going to know a lot of the stuff that's behind the closed doors, in the locker room, in the meetings, that sort of stuff. So we may not see everything from a leadership standpoint from Tucker Kraft. But if there is opportunities that are out there, are we going to see him take that step, that next step in being a leader on this team that he himself noted after that playoff loss, saying he's got to step up or he's going to step up and be a leader? We saw a lot of positive things from Kraft last year that I think has a ton of people excited about his possibilities within this offense and on this team. You know, and I know tight ends usually take a couple years to really grow into a top tight end in this game. You know, George Kittle didn't come in right away and become an all-pro. Travis Kelce didn't come in right away and become an all-pro. Not everybody's going to be like a Brock Bowers from the Raiders last year, who was just flipping amazing as a rookie, or even a Sam Laporta for Detroit that came in right away. Maybe Tucker Kraft is one of those guys that, okay, year 3, it's going to be kicking it into gear here. And it's not to say he was bad last year or anything like that. It's just year 2, we saw some glimpses and we saw some flashes like, oh, here we go. And we wanted more of that. We thought he should have gotten more. We thought he should have deserved more, and he probably should have. But he's also a great blocking tight end. He gets open. He's a great receiver. He's got a lot of those tools that we want to see from an all-around good tight end. So there's this focus on him. There's this spotlight on him. Like, can he be that guy this year? Can he almost elevate to a top-tier tight end right now? You know, for example, if you go to ESPN and they're doing their top 10 rankings from, you know, evaluators across the league, Tucker Kraft was not listed as a top 10 tight end. In fact, he wasn't really in the honorable mentions either. He was in a department that, got votes. But you're talking about maybe not a top 12, not viewed as a top 12, 13 tight end in the league right now. But I do believe Tucker Kraft has the ability, has the talent to become a top 10 tight end in this league. And I believe he is in a system that could allow him to become a top tight end in the league. The only concern I would have is he going to get enough opportunities to be viewed as a top tight end in this league? And what is Matt LaFleur and what is Adam Stanovich and the offensive staff? What are some of the game plans? What are some of the calls, or how are they going to develop an offense to kind of maybe suit 85, or to really have 85 be a focal point of the offense? And will they? Will they make 85 a big focal? They're saying all the right things, but will Tucker Kraft really be a main focal point? I hope so. And I think a lot of fans are hoping that's going to be the case. I really do. Because I think he could be a really good player. I think he's already a good player, but I think he could take it up another notch this year with more opportunities. And I hope he gets them. Because I think he's a playmaking tight end. And then behind that, we talk a lot about the receivers and, who's the number one receiver? It's Jane Reed, Romeo Dobbs. You got Matthew Golden coming in now. Dontavian Wicks, Savion Williams is an intriguing piece. But I think when you talk about number one receivers, I think you do have to put tight ends into that equation. Because for the longest time, your number one receiver for Kansas, number one receiver for Kansas City was Travis Kelce, and he's a tight end. You can make the same case for Rob Gronkowski with the Patriots when they were winning all those Super Bowls. Your top target can be a tight end. And I think a lot of times we tend to focus on the number one receiver or the number one target always being a wide receiver. But that can be your tight end. So when we talk about, do the Packers need a number one wide receiver, or who is their number one wide receiver? I think you throw Tucker Kraft into that equation. They're not the flashiest all the time, right? They're not going to make those, not all the time. Some can, but they're not going to make the big splashy down the field type of throw or catches and make those big plays. But they can be a number one target. And I think Tucker Kraft should be a part of that equation, a part of that group that could be that number one target for Jordan Love. And then you look behind him, you got another tight end entering his third year, and that's Luke Musgrave. Now, Luke Musgrave last year didn't get a ton of playing time. He was hurt. He missed some games. And when he was back, he finished with 7 catches on the year. Not a ton of work, right? He started off the season, played the month of September, but then missed a ton of time, came back late December. And just really never, it was almost kind of a wash year, if you will. But this is a guy that you look at what he brings to the table. You're talking about a 6'6", 250-plus tight end that has some speed to him. And I hope, even with the emergence of Tucker Kraft, I hope that Luke Musgrave is still kind of viewed as a potential piece within this offense too, because I still think he can bring something to this offense. I think he has those traits. I think he has the ability to also bring something. Tucker Kraft, there's no question, there's no debate, there's no position battle. He is the number one tight end. But in my opinion, there is no reason why we can't have certain formations, certain play calls, certain play sheets where, all right, we're going to run a 2 tight end set with both these guys. And we're going to have some plays for Luke Musgrave because he has those unique traits and knows that talent to be able to provide something to this offense. Maybe it's in the red zone, using his height, using his athleticism with that, creating mismatches. When you got 2 tight ends, Tucker's 6'5", you got Musgrave at 6'6", And I've said this before, and I'll say it again a little bit more coming up with when we talk about LaFleur and play callers. But if I'm LaFleur and I'm looking at some of the guys I have on my roster from a pass catching scenario, I'd be like a mad scientist in the lab right now. Like I'd be Dr. Frankenstein or something like that, and just having a wee old time of coming up with some play designs. I mean, for crying out loud, think about this. Okay, I got Josh Jacobs in the backfield. I got a Tucker Kraft and a Luke Musgrave, a 6'5" and a 6'6". 6'6", speedy tight end. I could put those two there. I've got Josh Jacobs there. I could throw in Matthew Golden with his speed. Throw in a little Jaden Reed if I want to. I mean, you've got this ability to come up with some unique and creative stuff, and I hope they do that, even with Tucker Kraft, with the bona fide number one tight end he is. I hope we still see Luke Musgrave involved in this offense because I think he can still provide something. I like this 1-2 punch. I still think there's potential with this. Is it a great, I mean, you talk about some great 1-2 punches in the tight end group and that. They're entering their third year. They still got a lot of room to grow and get better. But I hope both of these guys get plenty of opportunities to make an impact on the offense because I think they can. And especially if there is a little bit of question marks with some of the receivers yet until they grow, or maybe, gosh forbid, that they're struggling with drops again. Let's get the tight ends more involved in this thing. Let's get a little bit more play action going here and get those tight ends. Create those mismatches with those tight ends, for crying out loud. I mean, there's no reason why a Musgrave and a Tucker Kraft can't beat a linebacker. Or somehow, if you can create a mismatch where one of those guys is going to have a corner lined up against them, you feed that all day, every day. You have the ability to, with the amount of athletes and your pass catchers and with Josh Jacobs, you have the ability to create some of those mismatches. And two guys that I think are going to benefit or have an edge in creating some of those mismatches are going to be the two tight ends. And, you look at the next two on the depth chart, if you will. And this isn't a knock on either one of these guys, but, Ben Sims, your third tight end. Again, you're talking about a big tight end, a tall tight end, right? I mean, he's also a younger tight end entering his third season. You're talking about a 6'5", 250-pound guy. As a third tight end, cool. And again, I'm not trying to knock the kid or anything like that. But, I mean, you look at this group and you could say, wow, they got some big dudes at tight end. And they got some speed to them, too, considering the position they play in. But Ben Sims probably going to be mostly a special teams guy. Once in a while will come in for certain offensive packages. And then same with John Fitzpatrick. I mean, back end, depth fillers, and this is a guy, too. Dude, 6'7". 6'7". So don't tell me that you don't have the potential to create some of those mismatches with your tight ends. Remember for like the longest time, their Green Bay's tight ends were like 6'2", 6'3". And it's like, man, we need to get some height. Green Bay got height. They got some height with their tight ends. 6'5", 6'6", 6'5", 6'7". You can create something. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able, if you got to make a red zone throw within the 5, there should be no reason why you can't throw a couple jump balls to these guys and just tell them to out-jump that linebacker or out-jump that 5'11 corner, for crying out loud. You got some height in this tight end group. Utilize it. Why not? Why wouldn't you? And that goes into the next storyline for me heading into training camp. With the tight ends, are we going to see a year 3 jump from a lot of these guys? Especially Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. Can he stay healthy and maybe make a jump? And that's all going to, or I should say all, but a lot will depend on how they're utilized, how they're featured within the offense, and that starts with Matt LaFleur, the play caller. Yes, Adam Stenavich is the offensive coordinator. He's going to have input. He's going to have a say. But Matt LaFleur is the one that calls the plays. And how much is he going to feature Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave? How is he going to, quote-unquote, spread the ball around? You know, Matt LaFleur, after the season was over with, after that playoff loss, there was a big chunk of the fan base that, and still are, not on the Matt LaFleur bandwagon. Not on that train. They feel like maybe Green Bay needs to move on from him. Now, I personally don't think Matt LaFleur is like on the hot seat. Yeah, maybe the Heat, but I would say he is entering, I would say, kind of a pivotal year, because I think a big part of it is we want to see, okay, continued growth, continued development, continuing to adapt as a play caller, continuing to get better or getting better, because I feel like he's got a unique skill group on the offensive side, whether it's, you know, your wide receivers with everybody that we just mentioned. You do have Josh Jacobs coming back. You got these tight ends. You've invested a little bit in the offensive line. You've got Jordan Love now as your quarterback. You know, this kind of goes hand in hand too. Everybody's saying Jordan Love regressed last year. You know, Matt LaFleur's got to be looking at this. One, I would be, again, excited if I was an offensive-minded play caller and I'm looking at some of the athletes I have on my offensive roster and I'm like, now we're cooking. Why wouldn't you be excited to come up with certain play sheets and play calls and that sort of stuff? But it's also going to be on Matt LaFleur's shoulders to get the most out of these guys. To get the most out of Jordan Love. To get the most out of Josh Jacobs again. To get the most out of these receivers, these tight ends. Is he going to be able to come up with these game plans? Matt LaFleur is a great play caller when he's in that zone, and we've seen it a few times, but when he's in that zone where he just, it feels like he's one step ahead of the defensive coordinator. We saw that at the second half of 2023 when Green Bay went on that run and made the postseason, goes down and beats Dallas, and you know those sorts of games. It just felt like Matt LaFleur was one step ahead of the opposing defensive coordinator. And when he's in that rhythm, dude's on fire. It's like, you know, a basketball player that's just on fire and can't miss a shot. That's what it felt like with LaFleur in certain stretches. Like he's just a step ahead. That stretch, those 2 weeks earlier in the season with no Jordan Love, he was fantastic. But if you're on the side where you kind of criticize Matt LaFleur a little bit in terms of consistency, questionable decisions, and all that, you got an argument to make. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying Matt LaFleur is the best coach in the league right now. He definitely needs to grow in certain game situations and certain, you know, like questionable decisions at high juncture points in the game and that. And I hope he does that this year. I mean, as a coach, you hear coaches all the time saying, continue to get better. I guarantee you Andy Reid still looks at ways to get better, to continue to improve. I mean, for the longest time, what was Andy Reid's knock? Timeouts, game management, clock management. That was a knock on Andy Reid for the longest time. Every coach is going to have issues that they're going to continue to work on no matter how long they've been in this league. But I would say that this is a year, too, that a lot of people want to see improvement, growth from Matt LaFleur as a head coach. As a head coach, maybe, you know, he's got the play caller title with him, too, but just overall game management, understanding situations, that sort of stuff. So I don't think like Matt LaFleur is going to get fired unless something drastic happens this year where it's just god awful. But I think it is fair to say, okay, want to see a little bit more. Want to see some more growth from him. I want to see a never-ending playbook where he's always keeping guys guessing. This is where I give Andy Reid a ton of credit every single year. It's like the book should be out on him with this offense. Yet, nobody could stop it. Yes, it helps to have a Patrick Mahomes, a once-in-a-generation type of quarterback, and a great tight end in Travis Kelce. But he has adapted to his players, and he keeps teams guessing. And that's what the great play callers do. And that's, last year, Green Bay was very run-focused. What is going to be the case this year for Green Bay? How is he going to keep opposing defensive coordinators guessing week in and week out? This is an insanely tough division and an insanely tough schedule outside of the division. Matt LaFleur is going to be a key person to determine the success of this Packers season from his play calling and from his head coaching decisions. He is going to be a very key person in determining the outcome of a lot of these games, and these are some tough, you-know-what games on the schedule. And I think he's going to be a little bit more under the spotlight because of that, too. How has he grown as a head coach heading into this year and as a play caller? That's what I'm focusing on. And then Jeff Hafley, staying with the play callers, entering year 2, defensive coordinator. I still say, like last year, that if he made leaps and bounds improvement on defensive coordinator, he's going to be a head coach in the league. And well, he got some interviews, and I still feel that way. I feel like you are going to continue to see him getting mentioned about possible head coaching interviews or openings, jobs. I look at this now. Last year, given what Hafley was given with injuries and such, I thought he did a really good job. And I think it's fair to say he probably didn't get to do exactly what he wanted to do on the defensive side. You know, after the season was over with, you kind of heard him talk a little bit more, wanted to play more guys in coverage, wants to get home with 4 or 5 guys on the line, and they couldn't consistently do that. And then you factor in the injuries to the secondary they had. I mean, game plans were adjusted on the fly during those games, depending on who was hurt and who was available. And when you factor all that stuff in, and the lack of production up front, when you factor all that stuff in, I thought he did a really good job. I mean, turnovers, one of the tops in the league at creating turnovers. Xavier McKinney signing was, between that and Josh Jacobs, 2 of the best, if not the best free agent signings and impacts on their teams. Then last year, Saquon, part of that, though, too. But now heading into this year, there might be a little bit more tape on what Jeff Hafley wants to do. But I think the big focus on him now is like, okay, your front office didn't get you another pass rusher. Your front office brought you Hobbs for the corner, but you lose Jair. You look at it from a defensive standpoint, you know, they didn't outside of Hobbs, the free agency, they didn't bring in a lot of defensive help to help you day one. I mean, the draft, your first 3 picks were all offense, right? Matthew Golden, Belton the tackle, Savion Williams. So you're counted on for growth from your other guys, from the guys that were on your squad last year. Edgerrin Cooper. I mean, there's entering a year 2, and believe me, Edgerrin Cooper is going to be one of the storylines as we get closer to this thing. But there's a lot on Jeff Hafley, a lot on his shoulders this year to use essentially the same guys he had last year and continue to get better at the defense. Can he do it? Now that he's more familiar with these guys, now that his players are more familiar with him, a big thing will be if they can just stay flipping healthy. But are they going to be able to generate a rush with Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Lucas Van Ness, Rashawn Gary? And if they can't, then what does Hafley do? How does he adjust? Does he get away from what his core philosophy, what his core thing is that he wants to do on the defensive side, and that's drop extra guys back in coverage. So you're going to bring more to try to generate that pressure. Then you're potentially putting out on an island Keyshawn Nixon going up against like a Justin Jefferson, a Carrington Valentine, or Hobbs, or whatever. And we haven't, we talked a little bit about Edgerrin Cooper, but you got Quay Walker, you got Isaiah McDuffie coming back and such. I mean, I'm excited to see a year 2 Jeff Hafley run defense. I'm excited to see growth. And I think there is an expectation, or there is a thought that there's a lot of good stuff in year 1. Just wait for year 2 now. And I get that, and I understand it, and I would agree with it. Like, okay, I'm excited for year 2. Let's just stay healthy. Green Bay relied on a lot of rookies last year. Evan Williams, Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard. You switched from a 3-4 to a 4-3. Maybe there was some adjustment there. All right, these guys, they're a little bit more accustomed to it now. I am expecting an overall more consistent and a little bit better of a defensive performance. I think the biggest thing, though, is they've got to stay healthy at a lot of their key spots. Odds are, yeah, they're going to have a guy miss some time, a couple guys miss some time. But are they in a better position to where if a sub has to come in, that they can, you know what, next man up, we're not changing what we do? Are they in a little bit better position? Are they more confident in that? Is Jeff Hafley more confident in that now? And then you look at special teams. Rich Bisaccia, also assistant head coach and such. A lot of fans, at least from the ones I've seen, not happy with Rich Bisaccia right now. Especially when you look at, coverages. I mean, the Bears game exposed a lot of it, right? But you look at certain other stuff on the special teams. I think you give Rich Bisaccia a tip of the cap and a little bit of credit for the job that he has done with Daniel Whalen as a punter. Daniel Whalen, I think, is turning into a very, very good punter. They bring back McManus, who's settled that kicking situation. That one's tough to gauge before McManus, the whole, like, Anders Carlson and, just was that more of a front office thing where the front office is like, this is what you're going to get? Work with it. I would imagine he had some input in Anders getting drafted because of his familiarity with the family, but I don't know that 100%. I don't think we will fully know that. But you bring in a veteran, McManus, kicking situation, settle down a little bit. But then you look at, you got Mecole Hardman and Keyshawn Nixon, 2 very good returners. If I'm Bisaccia, and we know a game can turn on a big return, punt, kick, whatever. How do I get those guys to maximize the amount of time that they can bring the ball back, get the ball in return, on a punt? Because I want that ball in their hands and trying to make some big plays with some big returns. I mean, we're not talking about taking one to the house every time. But if you're returning a kick, a punt, let's say, and you could get it out to the 40-45 and create a short field, I mean, your offense is already at such a huge advantage where the defense is playing on its heels. A big return, punt return to midfield. So if I'm Bisaccia, I'm like, how do I get this? Do I put more pressure on a punter? How much, the protection, the coverage, that has to improve. Situational awareness has to improve. Being aware of like, hey, you know what? We can't forecast it. We can't predict it, but a team might pull off something like what the Bears did with that kick return, the complete misdirection and the complete, just not paying attention or focusing on. I mean, I don't know what you want to call it, but that has definitely got to get better. Situational awareness on the returns and the coverages. That is something I hope Bisaccia is working on with this group. I understand special teams are sometimes, this is who you're dealt with. This is what you got to work with. It's bottom-end roster guys making the roster just because of special teams play. We saw when Rich Bisaccia first came aboard, it really seemed like Green Bay was focusing on bringing in players to play special teams. Kind of got away from that a little bit. This is the guys that you're going to be called upon. How can you get the most out of those guys? How can you get the most out of a back end, bottom of the depth chart corner, wide receiver, or John Fitzpatrick on the tight end depth chart? How do you get those guys ready? And I challenge some of those guys, though, too, on special teams. If you're a corner, of course you want to be on the field on the defensive side. But if you're on the bottom of the depth chart, you play every special teams play like that's your Super Bowl play. Because if you're going to make plays on special teams, the more you're going to get noticed. Make your plays. Make those plays. Get noticed that way. You might only get a handful of plays each game. And if you're not maximizing the effort on that, dude, what are you doing?